Wide receiver Corey Coleman was drafted by the Cleveland Browns with the 15th pick overall in the 2016 NFL Draft. The former Baylor Bears career thus far has been characterized by drops, injuries, and the lack of progress expected of a first-round pick. The new regime in Cleveland, led by GM John Dorsey, decided to pull a plug on the off-injured Coleman, so he and Bills GM Brandon Beane arranged a trade. In order to fully understand why a former first-round pick was traded for a future 7th-round draft pick, let's take a look back at Coleman's film since becoming a pro. Coming out of Art Briles' offensive system at Baylor, Coleman was extremely raw. In that high-octane offense, he didn't run the full route tree or develop the nuances of playing the position, so it didn't quite prepare him for the next level. That's why in his rookie season, the Browns didn't ask much of Coleman. They sent him deep often and mixed in a lot of underneath stuff, including a handful of wide receiver screens. Coleman experienced early success by registering 7 receptions for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns in his first 2 games, but his issues soon showed up. Heading into week 3, the team discovered that Coleman had broken his hand.
He broke a bone in his hand. Today's his first game back since week 2.
And that was a shock to everyone's system because he actually practiced the entire practice.
From there, his season was well below average, but there were many reasons for that. Starting with the QB situation. In the 2016 season, the Browns started 5 different quarterbacks. This made it very difficult for Coleman and the other young receivers to build any sort of rapport with any one of the quarterbacks. But to make matters worse, the QBs that were on the roster did not mesh well with the vertical threat that Coleman was. Too often, balls were underthrown or slightly off target, which prevented him from blossoming into the explosive playmaker he was drafted to be. Quarterbacks like RG3, Cody Kessler, and Josh McCown, all of whom registered over 250 snaps that season, took turns attempting to get the ball to the speedster. At times, the QB struggled to accurately get the ball to Coleman as he ran routes underneath. A slightly inaccurate ball on these sort of crossing routes forced him to slow the pace of his route down, limiting the amount of damage he could do. But Coleman is not without fault. He struggled with drops. According to Pro Football Focus, he dropped 4 passes out of 37 catchable balls for a 10.81 drop rate. His main issue is looking the ball in when a defender is closing in on him, framing the pass with his hands, and the tendency to body catch. This leads to a lot of his drops. Coleman also struggled with the mental processing and physicality needed to play the position. There were times where he should have understood the down and distance, read the coverage, processed the technique that was going to be used by the defender, then outwork him to make a play for his team, just like on this 3rd and 1 slant call versus a Tampa 2 coverage. He lost most physical battles with defenders at the line of scrimmage and down the field. You simply cannot let the defenders cut off your route. You need to use your hands to separate. There were even times when he ran go routes too wide, allowing the corner to squeeze him into the boundary. This leaves a quarterback nowhere to throw. Due to his smaller stature, he needs to refine his technique, because defenders will not shy away from pressing him. On this 3rd and 4 play, the lack of efficient hand usage allows Tavon Young to stick with Coleman. On the snap, Coleman attacks the outside shoulder of the defender, and that gets Young to start his kick step towards the sideline. With his hips already slightly open, Young attempts to disrupt by jamming Coleman. At this point, Coleman needs to wipe the jam by placing his right hand near the elbow of Young. He fails to do so, and Coleman is unable to separate. Now on to 2017. Did he still have growing pains? Sure. He still showed the tendency to drop passes. He dropped 4 out of 27 catchable passes, which breaks down to a 14.81 drop rate. Injuries reared their ugly head as Coleman was again injured in the Week 2 matchup versus the Ravens. Fingers crossed for Week 1. But overall, Coleman showed an enormous amount of progress on the field. Rather than just rely on his physical talents, the Browns put more on his plate, and Coleman flashed improvement. He was much more aware of coverages and how they were meant to bottle him up. The cornerback attempts to play underneath Coleman with help from the safety deep. Coleman manipulates the route stem to the corner, and it fools both defenders. He is now able to pivot back to the middle of the field into the open area. That is tremendous mental processing and nuanced route running. On this 3rd down call with the DB leveraging inside, Coleman closes the distance, uses his eyes to hold the defender, sells the slant and bursts out wide. The DB is out of phase, so Coleman stacks him but continues to hold the red line, giving his QB an area to throw to. He then displays good tracking, soft hands, and a stiff arm to finish. On this play, you will see Coleman stem vertically, but as the DB opens his hips to bail deep, Coleman widens the stem to make it look like he's going deep behind the corner. As he gets into the blind spot of the corner, he plants and runs a dig route to the middle of the field. The route and setup by Coleman is perfect versus the single high safety look. He snaps his head around and adjusts to the inaccurate pass, but this play could have been much bigger if the pass was accurate. Coleman had a very good game against corner Jalen Ramsey. Here he sells a 3-step slant, then blows by Ramsey. He then adjusts to the too high safety look by breaking to the sideline, catching the pass and stopping the clock. Here's another very good route, an exhibition of progress. He sells the route vertically by pumping his arms with his head down. Then as he approaches the 45-yard line, he throttles down and breaks to the post. He takes 3 steps and then breaks back to the sideline. Coleman doesn't allow Ramsey to overpower him. He keeps his balance as he separates towards the boundary. This was his first game back from injury, a game where he finished with 9 targets, 6 receptions, and 80 yards. Overall, Coleman's physicality and hand usage were drastically better in 2017. He didn't let defenders bully him as often. His situational awareness was also noticeably better. Like on this 4th down call versus the Steelers, he understands that he needs to be aggressive in order to quickly separate, catch the ball, and absorb the big hit. So on the snap, he foot fires towards the DB to close the cushion, comes to balance, and now has a two-way go. He drops his hips, plants and drives to the middle of the field. He places his hand on the elbow of the defender to break free, and even adds a little more physicality by pushing off with his left hand. He snaps his head around, tracks the ball and catches it, then protects himself as the big hit is coming. The trade by general manager Brandon Beane was a low-risk move, but with tremendous upside. Coleman's progress from year 1 to year 2 was noticeable, and that is surprising given the team dynamic and QB situation in Cleveland. It may take some time for Coleman to acclimate to the playbook, but at the very least, he could be a deep threat and a screen guy. It'll be up to wide receiver coach Terry Robisky and his assistants to develop the 24-year-old over the next couple seasons.